Blackstone Audio presents Where Futures End by Parker Peevyhouse. This book is read by Katie Coster, Caitlin Davies, Emily Wuzeller, Will Dameron, and Andrew Iden. For Elizabeth, who plans for endless futures.
1. When we asked the impossible. 1 year from now. Dylan. Dylan asked his first impossible question when he was 5, when he could still hear music and running water, still find gilded kingdoms trapped in beams of sunlight. Why do I see things no one else can see? Impossible to say, son. Dad had answered with a smile, closing the cover of the book they'd been reading, the blue fairy book. Are they real, the things I see? Dylan's older brother, Hunter, hated questions like that. Stop pretending you're special, he would say. In a storybook, an impossible question might be a riddle that could never be solved, a challenge that could bring the quest to a standstill. In real life, an impossible question might be easily met with a shrug or a sigh, but it might also carve the whole world into pieces as small as dust motes, so that you could hardly breathe for fear of scattering them all. At the age of 11, Dylan asked Dad an impossible question for the last time, when they were getting hot dogs at Alki Beach in West Seattle. It wasn't that Dylan never saw Dad again after that. It was just that there were no more jackets tied like capes, no more laughs that went sideways in the wind, no more perfect burn of salt spray and spicy mustard. The story of Dad and Dylan came to a standstill. In the years since the day at Alki Beach, Dylan had become an expert at impossible questions. He would creep into Hunter's room after lights out to ask, "What's at the bottom of a black hole in space? Is a red blanket still red in the dark? Why don't zombies eat their own flesh?" Hunter would pass one of his earbuds to Dylan, and they'd let the Sonics or the Rolling Stones answer as best they could. Why do I sense things no one else can? Dylan asked himself now, standing outside the prep school gymnasium where his brother's basketball game was taking place. He knew the crowd was about to roar. He felt the hum in his bones, without even seeing the action. And sure enough, a moment later, the cheer erupted. He opened the door and stood in the doorway. Gray and purple banners emblazoned with Hevlin Preparatory were slung on the walls. Heavily perspiring, Dylan and his friends had used to joke. Sophomore year before Dylan had gotten kicked out for cheating. Now it was fall of his junior year. A boy in a gray Hevlin blazer edged through the doorway. Blaine, who used to sit with Dylan at lunch so they could program modifications to their favorite PC games. He tipped his carton of popcorn toward Dylan and said, "Is it true that some kids carry knives to class in public school?" "That's why we get those metal rulers," Dylan said, reaching into the carton. "Levels the playing field." The air in the gym was warm, but Dylan suddenly wished he'd worn a jacket, because Blaine was staring at the peeling letters on Dylan's t-shirt that spelled out, "Put on your 3D glasses." "It seemed cool in my mom's pawn shop," Dylan said. "Anyway, my old Hevlin uniform's too small now." "I wish I didn't have to wear this thing." Blaine flicked the collar of his blazer. "Think I should defect? Try my luck with metal rulers?" Dylan tried to laugh, coughed out a popcorn kernel instead. Blaine eyed Dylan's slouching frame. "Hevlin has to expel somebody at the end of each year, to keep the rest of us sweating." He studied his popcorn carton and shrugged. "Probably only picked you because you were on scholarship." Dylan tried to give off an air of, "Sure, fine," leaning back against the doorway. That odd electricity hummed in his bones again, and then, what do you know? Out on the court, his brother sank another three-pointer. The crowd chanted his name. "Hunter! Hunter!" The other team called a timeout. The hum in Dylan's bones subsided. He had a clear view of his brother standing a head taller than the rest of his team. Everything about Hunter's face was rugged. Sheer cliff forehead, wide chin. Even his sideburns looked like they were trying to reclaim territory ceded to his ears. "Your grades weren't really that bad, though, were they?" Blaine asked. "You were on the team that went to math regionals." "I cheated on my finals. Zero tolerance rule. Whatever." Blaine's eyes widened. "We actually debated the legality of that zero-tolerance rule in philosophy class," Dylan said. "Whether it's really fair to kick someone out for a first offense." "They have philosophy in public school? Huh, wow." Dylan didn't answer. On the court, Hunter slid past the point guard and flipped the ball up to the basket. Blaine's mouth hung open. "It's like someone spliced dolphin DNA into his." The air in the gym was way too warm, the popcorn smell stifling. "I'm gonna go," Dylan said. "See you online sometime?" "You know my gamer tag." Dylan strode toward the bench where the second string was watching the game and grabbed Hunter's jacket. It would be cold out in the parking lot. As Dylan turned back toward the door, he was startled to see Dad sitting in the bleachers. What was he doing here? He never came to Hunter's basketball games. Maybe I'm seeing things again, Dylan thought. Then the crowd shifted, and he glimpsed another face that didn't belong. The face of a girl he hadn't seen in ages, except in his memories. His stomach twisted. Definitely seeing things. The buzzer signaled the end of the game. Dylan lost sight of both Dad and the girl as the crowd stood to cheer. He found a ski cap in the pocket of Hunter's jacket and tugged it on over his ears as he hurried outside, bristling with confusion. Out in the parking lot, pale twilight, the cheers gave way to leaves skittering over asphalt, car doors popping open. The typical Seattle smell of rain and salt was in the air, plus a brewing wind. The tops of the distant maple trees shook as if a monster might charge through the branches at any moment, like something out of Jurassic Park. That sound, leaves rustling in the dark. Dylan closed his eyes, waited a beat, and then opened them. He half expected the trees to have disappeared, half thought he'd be transported to somewhere else. Where? He couldn't say. Why do I see things no one else can see? In his head, Dad's voice asked, "What kind of things?" He'd seen that girl in the gym before, seen her face lit by sunlight. But where? Who was she? A phantom from his memory. Someone he had known long ago, but who? Dylan angled himself toward the doors to the gym. Did Dad come to Hunter's games all the time? Maybe he did, and Dylan just never knew. Snuck in and out without saying hi because he knew how much Hunter hated him. Not that Dylan was keen to see him either. Last week's phone call was as much as Dylan could take for this month. Mom's fine, Hunter's fine, school sucks, bye. Nice game, Yates. Dylan turned at the sound of his last name, startled. Then he remembered that Yates was written on the jacket he was wearing. Thanks, he mumbled to the back of a guy in a school uniform. What kinds of things do you see? Dad asked again in Dylan's head. Blue light sparked along the skin of the guy walking away, and then fizzled out as he maneuvered around the cars in the parking lot. A physical manifestation of post-game excitement. Dylan had seen it before. He had a name for his ability to see such things, one he'd come up with back in the first grade when his teacher had read Jabberwocky aloud to the class. The Vorpal blade went snicker-snack. Over time, he had somehow dropped the blade. The Vorpal went snicker-snack. That was the exact feeling he'd get. His Vorpal would flicker, and he'd sense something others couldn't. Rain getting ready to fall. Squirrels sleeping in nests of leaves. Mom's worry. Hunter's dark moods. He never told them about it. Only his dad had understood. Yates, nice job, someone said behind him. Dylan turned, expecting disappointment or embarrassment. You're not Hunter, sorry. But it didn't come. The boy looking back at him was short, bad haircut, definitely a freshman. He kept on talking. That hook shot in the third quarter? The defender thought he had it until he almost got an elbow to the face. Dylan waited for the kid to realize his mistake. Dylan was 3 inches shorter than Hunter. His shoulders weren't even as wide as Hunter's rib cage. It was happening again. The weirdest thing. People mistook him for Hunter. Dylan knew it was his Vorpal's fault. It made him see things, hear things, but it also made people around him see things. Sometimes because Dylan wanted to change what people saw, and sometimes it happened by accident. He wasn't great at controlling it. Think we'll take Grady Prep on Thursday? The boy asked. Our cheerleaders could take Grady Prep, Dylan said, because it was true. Heck, I could take Grady Prep. Out of the corner of his eye, Dylan caught a flurry of movement among the parked cars. His mom darted around a BMW, flapping her hands at Dylan. "Sorry, I missed the whole thing, didn't I? I'm sure you were great." She strode up to him and gave him a peck on the cheek, turned to the freshman. "Was he great?" Realization finally dawned on the freshman's face. That's not Hunter Yates. Dylan's mom turned to look at him. Dylan half hoped she wouldn't realize her mistake, that she'd keep seeing him as Hunter. She was always so glowy with Hunter. But she jerked her hand away from his shoulder. "Dylan." Half surprise, half accusation. Dylan's face went hot, skinny as a spider monkey, but even his own mom mistook him for hulking Hunter, because of his vorpal. His mom was looking at him, jaw clenched. Dylan ducked his head. "I'll wait in the car," he said, giving up the idea of watching for Dad. Over his shoulder he called, "I can work at the store tomorrow," by way of apology. For what, he wasn't sure. Then he made for the Tahoe, his ears full of the sound of trees crackling in the wind. The pawn shop was a trove of old guitars and DVD players and a pair of cracked leather boots that had Dylan's name on them if he could get $10 more. Everything in the store had once been great, but was now only kind of cool, and only to someone like Dylan, who wasn't currently in a position to buy anything not used. He went to a shelf in the corner that held a row of fantasy novels everyone reads by the time they're 12. Wizards and monsters and magical relics. Stuff Dylan was too old for. Even so, he opened a copy of Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, and studied the illustrations. He made himself do this from time to time. He was trying to convince himself that the girl who haunted him wasn't real. Her face floated to mind more and more often lately, bright with wonder or squinting in concentration. And now he was seeing her even in Hevlin's gym, like his brain didn't know when to quit. He couldn't say how he had met her, or where, or when. Couldn't remember anything else about her, except for one thing. He had the distinct idea that she was a queen. Obviously impossible. How does a kid in Seattle meet a queen? That was how he knew he was only remembering a character from a story, a picture from a book maybe. He flipped the page and found a drawing of Alice with a crown and scepter, but her inkblot eyes held nothing familiar. The bell on the shop door jingled and a customer walked in. Dylan poked his head around a shelf. Not a customer. Hunter, lumbering around like he owned the place. "What are you doing here?" Dylan called. "I told Mom I'd work today." "Good for you," Hunter said, heading toward the back room. Dylan shoved the book back in with the others on the shelf and wandered toward the counter. "What's the movie we used to watch when we were kids?" he called to Hunter. "The one with the girl who's a queen?" Could be that's where Dylan remembered her from, a movie. No answer from the back room. Hunter had a terrible memory for movies. He never watched one twice unless it included an exponential number of explosions. The Never-Ending Story? Dylan wondered aloud. The girl in that movie was technically an empress. Close enough? Dylan thought he heard someone rummaging through the bins near the door. A customer after all. He closed his eyes and tried to guess exactly where the customer was standing. The bin on the far left, DVDs. He didn't have to guess. He could feel it in the way the air moved, could sense it with his vorpal. He checked the mirror in the corner of the ceiling and saw that he'd been right. A girl in a canvas jacket stood at the DVD bin. Dylan slid behind the counter and propped himself against a stool to wait. Hunter emerged from the back room carrying the cash box. "We watched too many weird movies when we were kids," he told Dylan. "How am I supposed to remember a girl queen? She had these eyes like..." Dylan pictured them in his mind. Like cracked ice. He waited for some hint that Hunter knew what he was talking about. He could swear he heard a clicking sound coming from Hunter's brain, thoughts shuffling and reshuffling. "I'm not really sure she was from a movie," Dylan admitted finally. "Or a book," he added to himself. "I might have met her somewhere." It was always dangerous to say something like that to Hunter, that he'd met a real queen in person, like he'd stumbled across her in a coffee shop, or maybe over in snooty Bellevue, ha ha. Those kinds of admissions made Hunter deeply unhappy. A Huskies losing to Oregon level of unhappy. "It doesn't matter," Hunter said. "Stop worrying about it, okay?" Can't, Dylan thought, and pictured her eyes again. Cracked ice, sunlight reflecting off every facet. Why do I remember someone who isn't real? Add it to the list of impossible questions. Hunter pulled a cloth from his back pocket and handed it to Dylan. Dust instead. The girl in the canvas jacket popped out from behind a shelf of junk, a shiny mask strapped over her face. "Hey, Hunter, what do you think?" Hunter chuckled. "C-3PO. "It's not," the masked girl said. "It's from Metropolis," Dylan said. "That robot girl." She shoved the mask up over her dark hair. "Have you seen it, the movie Metropolis?" "Sure," Dylan said. "Who hasn't?" She smiled, her brown eyes reflecting the gold of the mask. Her hair was like polished wood, like the black walnut trees behind his house when they were wet with rain. Hunter set the cash box on the counter, a little too hard. "Grab whichever DVDs you want, Chess," Hunter said to the girl. "I'm just going to put a 20 in here and that'll cover it." "There's another bin of them you didn't go through yet," Dylan told her, pointing. The girl, Chess, gave him a brief look. Curious? Interested? And then disappeared down an aisle. Dylan swiped dust from the glass counter with the cloth, thinking about that look, until he noticed something under the glass, a wide band of gold etched with vines. He clamped a hand on the counter, dizzy with confusion. "Where'd this come from?" he asked Hunter. Hunter shrugged. "A guy came in yesterday." "It's a bracelet, just a bracelet," Dylan told himself. But in his mind, he could see the girl queen sliding it onto his arm. "Dylan," Hunter said. "This is mine," Dylan said. Hunter snorted. "It's yours if you have $300. "It's mine. I got it from... Where?" He reached for it with a shaking hand and touched cool metal. Instantly, the smell of moldering leaves came back to him, along with a barrage of images. The damp fallen trees in a shaded forest, a girl's porcelain face, a gilded rooftop glimpsed through a puzzle of branches. She put her hand in mine. Her fingers were so cold. Mud all along her hem and spattered on her bare feet. "Where are we going?" She looked at me over her shoulder, and then the light was in the branches and in her hair. He remembered. Not only the girl queen, but a forest. Where? He slid the band onto his wrist. Cold metal sliding up my arm. Her voice, uncertain. "Remember me." A prickle went down his neck. He remembered Dad reading from The Blue Fairy Book. Remembered listening so intently that everything around seemed to vanish. He remembered the world parting to reveal enchanted trees, water churning over rocks. Things no one else could see. Hunter snatched the gold band off Dylan's wrist. "You got it from the display, and that's where you're going to leave it unless you can pay for it." Dylan's hands trembled. He looked again at the gold band. Was it just a bracelet? Of course it was. And those memories, that place? A dream, he told himself. An image from a storybook, a childhood fantasy only a sad loser would still believe in. Chess returned with a stack of DVDs. "Wow," she said, coming closer to peer at the gold band Hunter still held. "Looks like something from Lord of the Rings." "Here, try it on." Hunter held it out, and she slid the band onto her wrist before Dylan could object. "Looks good on you," Hunter told her, spearing Dylan with a glare. "Yeah, it's cool." The girl turned her wrist to admire the band some more. "So keep it for a few days," Hunter said. "What? You can't take stuff from the store," Dylan said to Hunter, his voice sharp with desperation. "She's borrowing it," Hunter said. He passed the DVDs back to Chess. "This all you want?" Chess nodded. She looked between him and Dylan. "Are you sure it's okay for me to?" Hunter grabbed her hand and steered her toward the door. "You want bagels?" The bell over the door chimed again, and they were gone. Dylan heaved plastic file boxes out of Mom's closet and disemboweled them. Papers spilled over the carpet. Dylan's childhood artwork. Paintings of green fish and bulbous insects, of uneven spirals like whorled snail shells. Shaky drawings of a girl's face. Another memory rushed to mind. Swimming through dark, frigid water. Around him tiny fish, drifting insects. Crustaceans felt their way along gravel and silt. The water brightened, and Dylan surfaced in a sunlit cave. A girl with ice-bright eyes pulled him by the hand up a rocky crawl that bit into his bare toes. He felt he was moving through a spell. The clinging mist, the chime of water dripping into shallow pools. The walls of the cave were dimpled with nooks where odd treasures lay like catalogued talismans. The girl picked them up one by one. A pearly snail shell the size of her fist. A yellow-green mushroom gone brown under the cap. A clump of waterlogged feathers. A smooth river rock veined with blue and red. Her collection. Footsteps, and then Mom's voice interrupted Dylan's thoughts. "What are you doing?" Dylan shoved the papers into a folder. "Looking through some old stuff?" He didn't know why he felt embarrassed about it, but it was like being caught sleepwalking, like explaining a dream to someone only to have it come out sounding absurd. Plus he never went into Mom's closet, not even just to look at old papers. "Did you see that gold bracelet that came into the shop yesterday?" In the doorway, Mom held her half-open laptop in one hand and squinted at Dylan. "No, and I wish you boys wouldn't offer loans on stuff like that without calling me in to do the appraisal. I think Hunter brought it in. He found it somewhere." Mom set the laptop down on her desk and flipped through a stack of bills. "Where would Hunter get something like that?" "I don't know." Mom frowned at Dylan. "Well, make sure you hold that stuff and wait for me in the future." She straightened a framed photo she had knocked over. Hunter and Dylan standing knee-deep in lake water, smiling with the sun behind them. She glanced from the photo to Dylan, then bent to ruffle his hair affectionately. "Do you remember a girl at the lake?" he asked. "When you took me and Hunter there for 4th of July. She showed me a cave." The lines around Mom's mouth deepened. "I don't know, Dylan, maybe." She glanced at Dylan's folder of artwork. "How about spending a little more time in the here and now? When am I going to see a progress report from school?" Dylan pushed the box back into the closet, but stuck the folder under his shirt. "When's Hunter getting home?" Maybe Hunter remembered the girl, the cave. Mom's attention was back on her laptop and the bills. "Late?" "How come when I take the car I have to be home by 10? "He didn't take the car, his girlfriend picked him up," Mom said. "And from now on, you're here every night doing homework. Until I see a progress report, you won't be so much as looking at the car." "Mom," she waved off his protest. "Enjoy the view from your room, sir." "The view from my room is of your car." Dylan waited to see if she would crack a smile, and she did. He stole away to his bedroom with the folder of drawings. The pine needles scrabbling against his bedroom window brought back another memory, searching in the yard for his pet rabbit, which had slipped the latch on its cage again, worrying absurdly that it had crossed over into one of the magical lands in the books Dad read aloud to him and Hunter, and then yearning to be there, in that magical land, away from the sound of his parents arguing in the kitchen. Dylan closed his eyes now, listening to the wind, and imagined himself in a forest. He smelled damp wood, heard a stream rolling over rocks. One step to the side, maybe, and he'd be there again, in the imaginary land he used to call the other place. He opened his eyes to pine needles splayed across ordinary glass. He'd ask Hunter about the girl and the cave. He waited in the den, hoping to catch Hunter when he came home, but later he woke up on the couch with the TV still on, not knowing if he'd only dreamed about the other place in the night, or if he'd actually gone there. He vaguely remembered chasing his pet rabbit, hearing his parents arguing in the kitchen, so, dream. Spread across the coffee table were the childhood drawings he'd taken from his mom's closet, lopsided toads and spotted trees, and a girl with overlarge eyes. Does the girl queen still wait for me? Does she think I've forgotten? He gathered the papers up and stumbled into the kitchen. Hunter came down while Dylan was still eating breakfast. Dylan was wearing one of Hunter's school blazers. It looked good with the Battle of the Bands t-shirt he'd picked out from the pawn shop a couple of weeks ago. Sort of preppy punk. He hunched over his cereal bowl and hoped his brother wouldn't notice. Hunter stopped short in the middle of the kitchen and narrowed his eyes at Dylan. Annoyed? Dylan tried to use his Vorpal to control what Hunter was seeing. It snicked and pinged all over the place, like some kind of crazy radar, a sound only Dylan could hear. Hunter glared at his own blazer on Dylan's back. He opened his mouth to say something. Dylan kept his Vorpal bouncing off the fridge, off his back, off the fridge. "You got milk on your shirt," was all Hunter said, and then he went to the fridge. Dylan smiled. He had pulled it off. He had a theory about why he could do things like that. He knew everyone had a Vorpal, because he could sense them, but most people's Vorpals were weak. Dylan's was strong enough to overpower anyone else's. His Vorpal could trick theirs into seeing what he wanted them to, when Dylan could control it. "Does your girlfriend still have that bracelet?" Dylan asked. Got straight to the point. Might as well. Hunter swigged orange juice from the carton with a disinterested air. "It's not yours. I don't know why you think it is." "Where did you get it?" Dylan asked. "Will you just tell me?" "Tell me where you really got it." Hunter fumbled with the carton. "I found it," he admitted. Dylan tensed. "Out in the shed. It must be—" Hunter almost dropped the juice, finally wrestled it back into the overfull fridge. "Something Mom put out there after Dad left, or I put there myself years ago." "I think it's mine," Dylan said, his skin going hot. "I think it came from—" The words whooshed out before he could stop them. "The other place." A sound came from Hunter's brain like whir, crack. He turned away. Dylan couldn't see his face. "I thought you would give up on that kind of thing after Dad left." He turned back, smirking. "He used to love that stupid crap." Heat spread up into Dylan's head, settled behind his eyes. "Is that why you took it? You're still mad about all that? Because he listened to my stories about the other place?" Hunter scowled. "I don't care about Dad." "You won't even talk to him on the phone. Because I don't care. He knew the other place was real. He knew I could see things. That's a nice story." Hunter smirked again. "Just like that story you told me about how Dad asked you to come live with him." The heat behind Dylan's eyes exploded. "He did. It's not like he'd admit it to you. He didn't want you to feel bad. He only had room for one of us on the houseboat." Hunter glowered at him. "Then why didn't you go?" I didn't want Mom to be sad. You know that." "Is that also why you got yourself kicked out of Hevlin? You didn't want Mom to be sad? Yeah, you're making life real easy for all of us." Mom strode into the kitchen, car keys jangling. "What are you two arguing about this time?" Dylan kept silent. He couldn't win with Mom against Hunter. Why can't she see what a jerk Hunter is? Another impossible question. Mom eyed the rumpled pillows on the couch in the living room. "Dylan, did you fall asleep doing homework last night? How are you going to keep your grades up if you watch TV while you study?" "Mom, I'm serious about what I told you last week," she broke in. "If anything goes wrong this semester—" Dylan swallowed. "My homework's right here." He nodded at the folder full of drawings on the table and hoped she wouldn't look too closely. Hunter snatched it up. "Hey!" Dylan grabbed for it, but Hunter's reach was famous. "This what they teach in public school?" Hunter held up a wobbly drawing of a bird. "They give you the option to write your essays in pictures?" Dylan stood and tore the paper from Hunter's hand. "What is all of that?" Mom asked. "Should we get a first grader to tutor you?" Hunter asked Dylan, snickering. "Hunter?" Mom said in a low, warning tone. "What?" Hunter said. "He had his chance at Hevlin. He blew it." "Shut up," Dylan said, hands shaking with anger as he shoved the drawing back into the folder. "And now you're screwing up public school too, just like you screw up everything." Dylan's gut dropped. Nobody thought he'd ever live up to his older brother. Not even Hunter. His mom held out her palms. "Stop already. Once upon a time, you two were friends." "Until Hunter's head got too big for his body," Dylan said. "Until he made varsity. Until he started acting like he wouldn't be caught dead reading any of the books we used to love reading with Dad. Just because he wants to prove that he doesn't care that Dad left, that he never needed Dad anyway." Mom put a hand on Hunter's shoulder. "Leave Dylan alone about school." "You know he cuts all the time," Hunter said. "You would too if you had to spend your lunch hour hiding from punks," Dylan muttered. Hunter smirked. "I wouldn't have to." He hooked an arm over the top of the fridge. "Neither would you if you didn't read kids' books in the cafeteria." Dylan pushed away an ancient memory of Hunter reading to him from a book of fairy tales in the car on the way to the lake house. "I cannot return home," said the girl as she moved in the water. "I belong here now." And they saw that in place of legs, she had a long, glimmering fishtail. How could Hunter forget how much we both loved those stories? "Grab your lunch, Hunter," Mom said, heading for the front door. "And Dylan, no more cutting school." She gave him a hard look and went out. Hunter slung his backpack over his shoulder and reached into the fridge. "Mom doesn't need any more trouble from you." Dylan's throat tightened. The memory came again. The fairy tale book, trees rushing past the car window. And then another flash. The two of them slipping into the other place, where a palace waited. "You remember, don't you?" he asked Hunter. "You remember going there?" He felt his Vorpal reaching out even as he said it. Searching, searching. Hunter stood staring at a shelf of produce, his faraway gaze lit by the fridge's glow. "You think that bracelet's going to help you get back to some magical land?" He slammed the fridge shut. "Trust me, it's not." He turned toward the front door. "Just forget about it, Dylan. Life's better in the real world." "For some people," Dylan mumbled, as Hunter pulled the front door shut behind him. Dylan left his half-eaten cereal and went out to the city bus stop on the corner. He was supposed to walk to school, Drury High, but he wasn't going to Drury. Everyone mistook him for Hunter. He might as well make the most of it. He got on the bus thinking of that gold cuff. Remember me. The bus dropped him off at Hevlin late. Can a person be late if he isn't enrolled? He went to philosophy, which was the only class worth going to school for, and wasn't offered at Drury. He had to do stuff like this when his brain went numb from boredom. Mr. Conrad looked up, brow furrowed, when Dylan walked in. Dylan could sense the man's Vorpal whirring weakly like a run-down clock. Dylan stood rooted to the spot and tried to figure out if Conrad recognized him this time, or if he remembered that Hunter didn't take philosophy this period. I have to switch to first period for today because..." Dylan's voice trailed off. Conrad spoke to the class. "Mr. Yates here is demonstrating the principle of sufficient reason. There must be a reason he has walked in during the middle of my class." Dylan's face burned. "But that does not mean his tardiness happened for any end." Conrad went on. "A reason, but not a reason. Have a seat, Mr. Yates." Dylan hesitated. It took him a moment to figure it out. He thinks I'm Hunter after all. He dropped into an empty chair. Conrad turned back to the board, paused. His Vorpal grated against Dylan's bones, searching, and then retreated from Dylan's reach. "Is it you who plays basketball?" he asked Dylan. "I'm told we won the game Saturday." He didn't wait for an answer, just went back to scribbling on the board. Everyone else in the room still had their gazes trained on Dylan. He could almost hear their thoughts. Great game. Nice job. It wasn't so bad sometimes, being mistaken for Hunter. In fact, Dylan had to admit to himself the real reason it happened so often. He wanted it to. During morning break, Dylan found a bench in the quad and started scribbling in his notebook the things he remembered about the other place. The drum of bird wings under the tower roof, the whir of wind-up clocks in the hall. He remembered discovering a carved tree in the palace garden, whose branches were really handles that rang hidden bells. He remembered the maze of boardwalks over marshland, and crouching to rescue a tiny creature all covered in spines, only to have it pierce his hand. He remembered floating in ocean water so buoyant, he'd half expected to look down and find he'd grown a fishtail, and then wishing he had grown a tail, because it would mean he would never leave, that he belonged there. Something tugged at Dylan's attention. He sensed Chess even before he saw her sitting under the trees at a table, sharing a pair of earbuds with another girl. He stood up and walked across the quad, feeling drawn to the gold bracelet glinting on her wrist. Could he get it back from her? Probably not, but Hunter could. That was another thing about Dylan's Vorpal. Usually he could use it to convince someone who wanted to be convinced. And who at Hevlin wouldn't rather be around Hunter than around Dylan, especially Hunter's girlfriend? She turned to flash him a knee-weakening smile. Then she froze, yanked the earbud away. The buzz of some pop song with an urgent beat accompanied her sudden confusion. "Movie tonight, huh?" he blurted, scanning the science fiction film club flyer she held in her hands, hoping to distract her from whatever was making her look at him like that. Kate Chesterfield was listed as the film club's president. Chess had to be her. Chess's gaze narrowed. "The day the earth stood still." Dylan's gaze went to the gold band that had slid down her arm. "You're wearing the bracelet." She put a protective hand over it, scrutinized Dylan. He could hear her Vorpal, undeveloped as it was, snick, snick, snick. Why were everyone else's Vorpals so much weaker than Dylan's? Impossible to say. Maybe it ran in families. His brother's was stronger than most, but he never used it. Didn't really know how. "You're Hunter's brother." She tilted her head to one side. "From the pawn shop." "Dylan," he said, a bit deflated. "Took me a minute to recognize you." Dylan shifted his stance. Well, it had almost worked. He looked at the bracelet. He could still ask for it back. She'd been nervous about taking it from the shop. An image popped into Dylan's head. Chess smiling at him, the gold robot mask pushed up over her dark hair, like a matching set, mask and bracelet. He tore his gaze away from her and pointed to the flyer. "Which appendage will it cost me to get into your club?" "What?" "Arm? Leg? I'm prepared to give both." She looked him over. "You're appraising them," he said, shifting nervously under her gaze. "No, it's just—" She gave him that same curious look she'd given him in the pawn shop, same glint in her eyes. His legs wobbled. "I thought you didn't go to Hevlin anymore." Dylan's stomach tightened. He looked down at his uniform, his brother's uniform, pants and blazer, rolled at the hems and cuffs. Plus the Battle of the Bands shirt from the pawn shop, definitely a violation of the dress code. Was it the shirt that had given him away? Hunter never wore anything from the shop. He couldn't be sure it hadn't been pawned by someone from school. He was careful about that kind of thing. Chess was still looking at him, waiting for him to say something. At any minute he might offer her a shop discount on obscure movie paraphernalia out of sheer awkwardness. He might start quoting Metropolis. Now that he thought about it, he already was. It was a silent movie. He cleared his throat and studied the flyer for The Day the Earth Stood Still. "Are you showing the original, or the one with Keanu Reeves?" "Do you have to ask?" Dylan laughed. "Maybe they should have cast him as the robot." He tweaked his neck and made his face into a blank mask, Keanu style. "The day Keanu Reeves stood still." Chess smiled, a slow smile that had Dylan holding his breath to see how it would end. She tilted her head to the side. 7 o'clock in the auditorium." She turned back to her friend. Dylan eyed the bracelet still glinting on her wrist. Later, maybe. His stomach rumbled. He shivered against the chill coming off the gurgling fountain. Since when had there been a fountain around here? He turned toward the cafeteria. The building was gone, and the crowds of students. The burble of water was a stream, and he was in a wood. But only for one more step, and then the buildings returned with the deafening noise from the crowd. Dylan jerked to a stop, as if doused with a bucket of water. The mineral smell of cold dirt lingered, but the wood was gone. He gasped for air, then doubled over with his hands on his knees. His heart was a skittering rabbit. The other place. He'd stepped in for a moment and then stepped right out again. Was that what had happened? His skin prickled in the cold. Rain drummed on the city bus window later that afternoon, on his way home from the public library. Dylan sat in the back, whipping through the pages of a tattered book, desperately looking for the girl queen. He found a woodcut illustration called The Fish Girl. "How do I get back there?" he asked her, as though a picture could answer. "Why is it so hard?" he wondered. "What's keeping me locked out?" In the Blue Fairy book, rewards always went to the virtuous, to the pure of heart. Maybe that's my trouble. He hadn't exactly been virtuous these past months, lying, cheating, pretending. He'd been looking for his rabbit the first time he'd found the other place, so maybe that was the key. You had to look for something lost. But it wasn't only that he'd been looking for something lost. He'd also desperately needed to get away. His parents had been arguing. Mom was angry at Dad for disappearing again instead of being happy to have him home. Whenever they shouted at each other, Dylan would wish for someplace nicer. And then it would appear. The other place. Like a dream or a hallucination. Am I going crazy? He could see the girl queen so clearly in his mind. A half-elf, winter pale. Not perched on a throne, but out in the trees, climbing just as well as his brother could climb the trees behind their house, scolding Dylan in a language he didn't know, but a tone he could understand. Higher, higher. Swinging by her knees, teasing him for being afraid. Her hair hanging down, a shivering flame inverted. Someone leaned over his seat. "Fast reader." Dylan looked up. He recognized a girl he'd gone to elementary school with. The hood of her dingy anorak framed her face so that she looked as little like a queen as possible. The effect was so jarring that Dylan only stared dumbly. "I heard a rumor you were going to Drury this year," she said. Dylan's brain finally started working again. "True story," he said. "How come I never see you around?" Her cheeks were pink with the cold. Dylan remembered a brief crush, 4th grade. Some incident involving his sticking an eraser into her ear. He prayed she didn't remember. "Are you on work release?" "Something like that," Dylan said. Better than telling her he'd cut school to go to philosophy class at Hevlin in the morning and hang out at the public library all afternoon. "Me too." She waved a hand at her black pants, which Dylan supposed was part of some work uniform. "What book is that? Looks ancient." Dylan clapped it shut. "They've got this whole collection of rare books at Washington State that they'll mail to the local branch." She blinked. "Cool. Is that where you work, the library?" I spend a lot of time there. I work at the pet store downtown, the one with the weird snakes and exotic birds. I basically just clean up all kinds of abnormal animal crap. You should come by and see these really freaky giant lizards we've got. Monitors. Yeah, I've seen them." Dylan gazed out past the raindrops at shining sidewalks sliding past. "I used to go in that shop as a kid and try to draw them. All my old school artwork looks like it was copied from cave paintings of dinosaurs." He turned back to find her confused expression. "That place used to be a comic shop when we were kids," she said. "The pet store moved in only a few years ago." Dylan gripped the rail, suddenly unsteady. "You sure?" His heart pounded. Did that mean he'd seen those animals in the other place? He reached up and yanked the cord. This is my stop." The cord was wet. No, his palms were sweating. The girl moved aside to let Dylan stand. "Hey, you want to go to a party Friday?" she asked. "Bunch of Drury kids, no tie needed." She flashed a smile. Dylan turned toward the door as the bus lurched to a stop. "Or do you have plans with your Hevlin friends?" the girl asked. No plans." He imagined calling them up, "Hey guys, remember me? The guy who got kicked out?" Then he imagined himself at a basement party with Drury kids. "Yeah, I left Hevlin. I guess they got sick of me. Must have been all those math awards." "It's at that puke greenhouse behind the high school," the girl said. "You know the one?" Dylan just nodded, waited for the door to whoosh open, and then barreled down the steps. He crossed the street toward his house, then froze. His mom had just stepped out onto the porch. "What are you doing home so early?" she asked. Dylan tucked the Fish Girl book behind his back so his mom wouldn't see it. He definitely couldn't tell her he'd gone to the library instead of to Drury. "Fast learner?" he tried. His mom glowered at him, clearly not in a joking mood. "Early release day," Dylan said quickly. He reached tentatively with his vorpal and tried to gauge whether she believed him. Maybe they could go for fish and chips, just the two of them. It had been ages since they'd done anything like that. Here's an impossible question. How does a mom forget she has two sons? "If I find out you're still cutting classes, I know, Mom, you're off to your dad's. I don't care at which end of Puget Sound he's got that houseboat parked." "Okay." Dylan rubbed a hand over his eyes. They'd had this conversation one too many times. His mom studied him in silence for a moment. Her vorpal ticked back and forth like a metronome. "I just came home to take Hunter to the doctor," she said, "and now I'm heading back to the pawn shop." "No fish and chips, then. They find a way to stop his ego from swelling? Very funny. Jumper's knee. And he's fine." She added in a way that said Dylan should have asked. She walked past him toward the car Dylan hadn't noticed, but then she stopped, turned to look at the book in Dylan's hand. Dylan felt a surge of panic. She'd freak if she found out where he'd been all afternoon. He imagined the novel as a chemistry textbook and tried to send the same thought out to her. "You know what?" she said, moving her eyes to Dylan's face. She chewed her lip. "You get a good report card this semester? Maybe we'll go to the lake for Thanksgiving." The book felt heavy as lead now. Dylan squashed his rising guilt. He nodded, and then she headed to the car. As he stepped into his living room, he squeezed his eyes shut like he sometimes did when he walked into a room, and prayed he would step into a different world. He opened his eyes to find darkness. The air was close and warm and stale. This wasn't his living room. Where was he? He reached out and knocked his elbow against wood, brushed his hands over linen and soft velvet. A crack of light showed between double doors. He was trapped in a wardrobe. He breathed in. He knew that smell. Her, the girl queen. These were her clothes, her wardrobe. He was in the palace. In the other place. "Hello?" he called and pushed at the doors. Locked. He pounded his fists on the wood. "Let me out!" He was like a maniac. "I'm here! I'm here! Let me out!" She would be there any moment, her face glowing with surprise at seeing him. "Let me out!" Finally, footsteps rushing to meet him. It was her. The doors shuddered. Dylan blinked in the yellow light of the living room. The wardrobe was gone. He was only scrabbling at the inside of his own front door. Hunter eyed him from a doorway upstairs. "Where'd you come from?" Dylan collapsed against the wall and clenched his eyes shut again. He reached out with his vorpal. He flung out his hand in search of a wardrobe door, hanging clothes. Nothing. "Are you drunk?" Hunter asked. "It's 2:00, and shouldn't you be at school?" "Leave me alone. I want my blazer back." Dylan shrugged it off and hurled it up over the banister. Hunter snatched it from the railing, held it out in his fist. "Stop doing that. Stop pretending to be me." He went back into his bedroom. Dylan's mouth went dry. Hunter knew? He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants, Hunter's pants, and then realized he had lost the library book, the one with the fish girl illustration. Dropped it outside, or left it in the other place. He checked the porch. Wasn't there. His head felt muffled, confused. How did Hunter know? He went up to his brother's room. It was cluttered with half-disassembled junk from the shop, DVD players and microwaves waiting to be repaired. Hunter sat at his desk, fiddling with a dinosaur of a radio that looked like it had time-traveled there from some unchronicled era. At his elbow was a framed photo of Chess, squinting against the sunlight. A UW Huskies poster overhead was stuck with so many thumbtacks that Dylan wondered if Hunter was afraid it would be stolen. Then again, he'd caught on to the fact that Dylan had borrowed his clothes, so maybe that wasn't such a crazy idea. Hunter jerked on some hazardous-looking wiring. "What do you want?" "Did Chess tell you I was at Hevlin today?" Dylan asked. "Chess?" Hunter looked up, his screwdriver clutched like a dagger. "That I was wearing your blazer and—" Dylan looked down at the pants he was wearing. Hunter seemed to notice them for the first time. His gaze darkened. "Did you think I wouldn't hear about Conrad's class?" Dylan's stomach dropped. "Why do you do that?" Hunter went on. "Everyone thinks you're crazy." A wave of dizziness hit Dylan. They knew? They had all noticed he wasn't Hunter? He put a hand against the door frame to steady himself. Sometimes people think I'm you, because of—" Hunter stood, grabbed the blazer he'd discarded on the bed. "Because you wear my clothes? Funny how that works." Dylan shook his head. "It's more than that. You know it's more." The silence was thick with Hunter's contempt. "You're Vorpal?" He crossed his arms. It sounded so stupid coming out of Hunter's mouth. It always sounds stupid. Vorpal's, a girl queen waiting for him in a palace. It sounded crazy. "You've got to stop, Dylan." Hunter jostled his arm. "Come back to reality." Dylan jerked away. "I'm not crazy. Dad really screwed you up, didn't he? Letting you believe all that stuff was real?" Dylan felt the cold sting of windy Alki Beach, remembered the day he'd asked Dad the last impossible question. The impossible question that had changed everything between them. And then right afterward, when Dylan had gone to the shed, hidden the bracelet. He pushed the memory away. "It is real. Even Conrad is 1,000 years old," Hunter said with a snort. "He doesn't know who's supposed to be in the class and who got kicked out of school for cheating on a stats final." Dylan winced. "Why did you cheat, Dylan?" Hunter sounded plaintive, almost angry. "You're smarter than most of the kids in that school. Dad was so proud of you. Came to all of your math competitions before you left Hevlin," Hunter said. "He's never even come to any of my basketball games." Wrong, Dylan thought. At Alki Beach 5 years ago, Dylan had watched the boats and told Dad about the sails he'd seen along the river in the other place, shimmering membranes made from dragon wings. "Mom doesn't like to hear about those things," he'd told Dad. "Can't I come live with you instead?" The last impossible question. Dad's whole face had changed, shifted like sand trickling down a steep bank. "Not everyone's fit to take care of a kid, Dylan. You're better off with Mom." Dad's voice was like water flooding his eardrums, like a wave crashing over his head. "It's time to give up those stories anyway. None of it's real. You know that, right?" "I hated those math competitions," Dylan said, his throat raw. "They were all Mom's idea. I never wanted Dad to come." Hunter shook his head. "What do you want, Dylan?" The air hummed, full of Hunter's exasperation. Maybe it was just the radio. "What will make you stop this? Tell me. I'll give it to you." Dylan's gaze went to the photo of Chess. Hunter noticed. He pushed Dylan against the doorframe. "You're living in a fantasy world." Dylan caught a metallic glint of fear in Hunter's eyes, even though Dylan was the one with a door jamb pressed against his backbone. "Because he knows my Vorpal is stronger than his." Unless they were right, Dad and Hunter. Unless it was all in his head. Dylan suddenly couldn't catch his breath. He thought he could feel his Vorpal like an extra organ, churning next to other worthless organs, appendix, gallbladder. But he was afraid to use it. Afraid that if he tried, it wouldn't be there, that he was fooling himself after all. Hunter still loomed over him. All of this crap you're pulling, getting kicked out of school, can't you see what you're doing to yourself? Can't you, Dylan pleaded, can't you just admit that you remember where we went when we were kids? Hunter's jaw tightened. His vorpal ground like stuck machinery. You know what I remember? Just say it. Tell me you remember. I didn't make it all up. Please. I remember you pretending. Dylan thought his lungs might be going flat. He searched Hunter's face, trying to figure out whether to believe him. He couldn't decide. He turned toward the stairs. Dylan, Hunter said, stay away from chess. Dylan couldn't help himself. He sneaked out of the house and went to the film club that night. Klaatu, Rorara, Nikto, he said to Chess at the door to the auditorium, just like in the movie. He jammed his hands into his jacket pockets. Why did he always have to be so weird? Aren't you clever? A line from The Day the Earth Stood Still. Chess still wore her uniform, plus a fleece cap that made her eyes seem bigger and brighter, even in the low light. The bracelet peeked out from under her jacket sleeve, but Dylan hardly thought about it. Her vorpal was pulsing candy colors, making halos tremble at the edge of his vision. He knew he was ridiculous for thinking about vorpals at all, but he couldn't help it. He could swear her vorpal was radiating happiness, reaching out to him with fingers of heat. You do this every week? He asked. Yeah, it's fun. Let's grab seats. She led him to the front row. After they sat down, she leaned close. Besides, Tuesdays are the nights my parents always rendered due benevolence, so I'd rather not be at home to see them flirting. She rolled her eyes. He turned the phrase over in his mind, then shoved his hands in his pockets, embarrassed. What's that from, Shakespeare? King James. Right, that's a Shakespeare play. She laughed. You're funny. He realized his mistake. The King James Bible, dummy. But she thought he was funny. Someone passed him a bowl of M&Ms. Does Hunter ever come to these things? Robots don't appeal to him. Not even Blade Runner? Acid Rain, shady corporations? He thinks it's weird that Harrison Ford falls in love with a girl who's not real. She elbowed him. He's your brother, shouldn't you know? Dylan cracked an M&M between his teeth. I think Blade Runner's romantic. Chess went on. But she was giving him that slow smile, so he didn't know if she was being serious. Someone started up the projector. What would you want with a guy who can't appreciate Blade Runner? Dylan asked. I don't date him for his taste in movies, Chess said. So why do you date him? Dumb question. Dylan had seen how all the cheerleaders crowded Hunter after a game, how girls fawned when Hunter did something as mundane as order a cheeseburger. But Chess took a second to think about it. She looked up at the ceiling. In the movies, the best guys to fall in love with are always a little sad. Dylan snorted. What does Hunter have to be sad about? Don't know. But he always seems like he's trying to make up for something, you know? An image came to Dylan's mind of Hunter jabbing at the old radio, sweating over something that would never work again. No, I don't know. Chess shrugged. Like he lost something. Dylan got a weird feeling in his stomach. Speaking of, what happened to your uniform? Chess gave him a playful smirk. Dylan ducked his head. He still hadn't explained to her why he'd been at Hevlin today. I realized they can't actually dock me points if I'm not enrolled here, so I figured it was safe to stop wearing it. She looked at him sidelong. Why did you come tonight, if you're not enrolled here? You bought all the good movies from the shop, so now I have to come here to watch them, he joked. Her smile went crooked. She thinks you're weird, Dylan told himself. She probably heard about you sneaking into philosophy class. The movie started. Dylan trained his eyes on the screen. Chess's gaze lingered on him a moment longer, her vorpal glowing bright in the dark room. Like the girl queen in the forest, standing in a shaft of sunlight that lent her an otherworldly glow. Dylan tried to concentrate on the movie, but Chess glimmered in the corner of his vision the whole time. He brushed his shoulder against hers and she leaned closer, solid, warm. He slid his hand into hers, thinking, I'm Hunter. I'm just Hunter. She smiled and leaned farther into him. My mom knows I'm going to hang out at your shop tomorrow. She wants to come by and pretend to look at jewelry so she can spy, Chess said, squeezing his hand. Dylan stiffened. It had worked. He pulled his hand away, disgust curling his stomach. Chess glanced at him. What? Nothing. A flush crept over her face that he could see even in the dim light. She must have realized he wasn't Hunter. She leaned away, probably telling herself that the movie had made her forget who was sitting next to her. Dylan shoved his shaking hands under his legs. Why did I do that? He hadn't thought it would really work. He'd only wanted to hold her hand. He glanced at her again, but her gaze was glued to the screen. After the movie was over and Chess had lifted the pull-down screen, Dylan carried the crate of leftover root beers to Chess's Subaru. They were pretending nothing had happened. Chess argued with herself about sentient robots as if Dylan were only an audience. He interrupted her. Do you think another world could exist right next to ours? Chess unlocked the car. Are we talking the Matrix? Our world is just a dream, there's another world beyond it? More like different realities, but each one is real. He set the crate in the back seat. Or maybe there's another world and it's not real, but you can still go there. Does that even make sense? She nodded. Inception. But in Inception, they weren't physically going anywhere. Everything that happened was just in someone's head. He watched his breath come out in streams of vapor. He was freezing cold. She reached for the door handle. Get in. He hesitated. They both shuffled awkwardly. Go ahead. It's like an alternate world in there when you blast the heat, Chess said with a smirk. He slid into the passenger seat. Did you ever read the Narnia books, or Harry Potter? Sure. She turned on the engine but didn't put the car into gear. Well, that's what I mean about other worlds. I hadn't thought of Narnia as an alternate universe, more like a fairy tale land. Dylan tried to look at the world as someone from the past would, as if he were in some futuristic movie. The half-frosted windshield, the dashboard display, all lit-up dials and slide-down switches. They could be wonders if you considered them with the right frame of mind. This could be a fairy tale land, to someone. Do you think we're too old for Narnia? He asked. Or any place like that, fairy tale lands? Reading about magic's not much different from watching movies about robots and replicants, I guess. No, I mean, do you think we're too old to be allowed to go there? In stories like that, in fairy tales, you have to be pure of heart. She narrowed her eyes at him, smiling. Are you trying to tell me something about your intentions with me? Dylan felt a flush creeping up his neck. I just meant... She brushed a hand over his arm. I heard why you had to leave Hevlin. He tensed. About how I stole the answer key for the final exam. He turned toward the window, saw only his dark reflection. That was dumb. I've been doing a lot of dumb stuff ever since... Like what? Like taking my brother's stuff, and hanging out with my brother's girlfriend. His arm still tingled where she had touched him. Not exactly pure of heart. He turned back to find her staring at him. She pulled up her sleeve to show the gold bracelet. Is this why you came tonight? You wanted the bracelet? Dylan still couldn't make up his mind. Was it only someone's lost bracelet? Or was it a relic from another land? A land no one else could see. A land that couldn't possibly exist. He ran his fingers over the gold, almost touched her skin. His whole hand was tingling. Was it really so bad to be here in the real world, with a girl he knew wasn't imaginary? No, I didn't come for this, he said to Chess. Something else of Hunter's, then. Her gaze was piercing. Dylan briefly considered the possibility that she could see straight through his skull to his thoughts. She moved her hand closer to his on the seat. Inviting him to hold it? It seemed like a crazy idea. How do you know if a girl likes you? The most impossible question of all. Why did you come? She went on. Are you here from the future to warn me of impending doom? Her smile reeled him in. Their fingers touched. He finally put his hand on hers. I've been looking for something, he said. But like an idiot, I don't know what it is. He leaned over and kissed her. She pressed the front of her shoulder into his and kissed him back. Hot air roared in his ear. It was the sound of a storm or a spell, even though it was just the heating vent. The warmth crept down to his toes, into his numb fingers. I don't want a girl who's not real, he said, as if that were a good explanation for kissing someone else's girlfriend. I don't want the girl queen, I want you. She looked puzzled, then smiled anyway. It worked for Harrison Ford. Not in the director's cut. Her smile faded. She put the car into gear. In that version, he wasn't real either. The next evening, the wind rattled the windows in Dylan's house as though calling to him, but he shut out thoughts of other worlds. Chess would be at the pawn shop. She'd said so last night at the film club. Dylan grabbed a Narnia book, thinking she might like to borrow it, and tucked his earnings into his pocket. He had enough to finally buy those boots he'd been eyeing. He jogged downstairs, wondering if Chess was at the shop already. Mom was in the kitchen. He thought she was supposed to be at a PTA thing while Hunter ran the shop. She turned as he came in, one hand plastered over her forehead. Where have you been all day? Her voice trembled. Dylan sensed trouble. He shrank against the counter. School. Really? Which school? Because I called Drury today to find out how many absences you have. Dylan's skin went cold with dread. They told me they don't have any record of a Dylan Yates enrolled there. The book in Dylan's hand almost slipped free. He tucked it under his trembling arm. Which is funny because I remember filling out the paperwork. What did you do, pull yourself out somehow? Her gaze drilled into him. What have you been doing the past 2 months? Dylan looked down at the floor. Studying on my own, in the library, sneaking into Hevlin. I told you, Dylan. I warned you that if you couldn't make it work at Drury, I'm sorry, he said quietly. She crossed her arms. Too late. I called your dad. Dylan's heart jerked sideways. He doesn't have room for me on the houseboat. He'll make room. Dylan gave her a pleading look he knew wouldn't work. To his surprise, Mom's face softened. She brushed her thumb over Dylan's brow. Is that what this is all about? She asked. You just wanted to live with your dad? Dylan turned to stone. Once he had wanted to live with Dad, a long time ago. But now... Mom sighed. You remind me a lot of him, because we're both screw-ups. He has a restless mind like you, Mom said. I thought the math team would be good for you, would help ground you. Dylan turned from stone to lead. Then why didn't you ever come to any of my competitions? Mom twitched back in surprise. That was your dad's thing. He was so proud of how much you'd grown up. But I hated math team. You're the one who made me join. I knew you'd never let me quit unless I cheated on my stats final and got kicked off the team. But then I got kicked out of school instead. He could hear the whir of Mom's thoughts behind her eyes, the buzz of her consternation. Everything's going to be fine, she said, her voice strained. This will be your chance to start over. I can't go to Dad's, he said. Please, Mom. Don't you want me to be your son anymore? Why don't you love me like you love Hunter? Dad's expecting you at the bus. Dylan was out the door before she finished. Down the walk in 8 quick steps. What had he done? He'd been so stupid. No. Crazy. He was losing it, had lost it, sneaking into Hevlin, searching for a fantasy land. But he'd tried before to prove to Mom that he wasn't a screw-up, And she'd never even come to his competitions. He'd tried to forget about the other place like Dad wanted him to, but that only meant he was left with nothing. Even Hunter thought he was a loser. Hunter knew, somehow, that Dad had never wanted Dylan to come live on the houseboat, and he knew Dylan was hurt enough to lie about it. The wind chilled his cheeks, his bare arms. The trees along the street groaned. He rubbed his hands over his face. He didn't want to live on a boat, and he definitely didn't want to live with Dad. Not after that day at Alki Beach, the way Dad had made him feel. It's time to give up those stories anyway. None of it's real. You know that, right? You're not a hero rescuing some girl queen. Dylan shut out Dad's voice. He could go to the lake, maybe. He and Hunter had always said they'd go live there someday, that they'd sleep right in the sand, on the man-made beach. Some people do that, his brother had once told him. Sleep wherever they get tired at the end of the day, in places where it's really warm. Just like in fantasy novels, where there always seemed to be a pile of hay or some springy grass and a sky full of stars overhead. He still had the boot money in his pocket. Forget the boots. He'd have to spend it on a bus ticket now. Dylan could go to the lake, try to get his head straightened out for a little while. He could even get a job at the sandwich place they always ate at. He realized he was heading for the pawn shop, to where he knew Chess would be tonight. He let his feet take him there. Through the glass front, he saw her inside, rummaging through a cardboard box that had left a wide trail through the dust on the floor. His heart went brittle at the sight of her. He reached for the door handle. "Forget the cash?" Chess said without looking up. "That bagel place should keep a tab for you. You probably account for half their business." She thought he was Hunter again. "Hey, don't forget my mom's stopping by later," she said. "Best behavior, okay?" She walked over to him, and Dylan didn't know if she realized her mistake or not. He didn't want her to. "I don't have bagels," he said weakly. "Don't sound so sad about it." She wrapped an arm around his waist. Dylan's heart sped up. "Hey, you brought one of the books I asked about," Chess said. She'd asked about it? "Yeah," Dylan said absently, setting the Narnia book on the counter. He could think of little else than her hand on his hip. He prayed she wouldn't realize her mistake. Chess gestured at the cardboard box. "I picked this up at a garage sale. Serious bargain. It's all stuff you can make a profit on, I swear." She held out a battered fedora. "For your brother." "My brother?" "Trust me, it's perfect for Dylan, straight out of Indiana Jones." She stuck it on her head, tilted it over one eye. "He's got to be into that." Dylan felt weak all over. All he could manage to say was, "Not the Crystal Skull one." "That one's crap compared to Temple of Doom." Dylan got a sudden flash of Hunter sprawled next to him on the corduroy couch in their living room, humming along to the theme that would stick in Dylan's head for the rest of the day, back when Hunter would still watch movies like that with him. Shit, what a title. Dylan let out a strangled laugh. Chess laughed with him. "Don't start," she said. "You have no taste in movies." Dylan spotted Hunter coming up the sidewalk with a paper bag in hand. The bus at the curb flashed Greyhound Station. Dylan reached for the money in his pocket, his saved-up earnings. He could give it to Hunter, use his Vorpal to convince him to go to the lake, just for a little while. He imagined going to philosophy every morning in Hunter's place, blowing off basketball practice to hang out with Chess, just for a few days, a week. His Vorpal could handle it if he tried a little harder. Outside on the sidewalk, Hunter paused and gave the bus a wistful look. Dylan's mouth went dry. Had he made Hunter do that? He backed off, backed right into a shelf, scuttled along the length of it until he was hidden from the window. "Hunter?" Chess called from the front of the shop. The door whooshed shut. Hunter clutched the bag of bagels. Dylan used his Vorpal to make Hunter forget them, to make Chess not see them so she wouldn't get confused. "You didn't pay money for that, did you?" Hunter asked, grimacing at the hat on the counter. "I don't think anyone will buy it." "It's not to sell," Chess said. And yes, some people would buy it. Hunter shrugged. I'll pretend you're making sense. Is your brother coming by today? Chess asked as Hunter moved to put the hat on a stand. Probably not. I heard my mom saying something about making him go live with my dad. He walked back over to her. Don't look so shocked. I told you he's been cutting school like every day. Hunter slid his hand over her arm. Chess stepped back, her mouth twisting. Were you wearing a different shirt earlier? She asked. Hunter looked down as though he needed to check. No. Dylan glanced down at his own shirt, the one Chess must have been remembering. Chess chewed her fingernails. Her eyes were cobwebbed with confusion. What's wrong? Hunter asked. A minute ago you were... Chess studied Hunter's face. She looked for a moment as though she didn't recognize him, as though she'd forgotten the difference between him and Dylan. You seem different. Something's missing. Hunter's gaze went to the display under the counter, as if Chess were talking about the inventory. In between shelves of hat boxes and bicycle parts, Dylan felt a hopeful stir. It was him Chess was missing. He looked at the Narnia book on the counter, a book Chess had asked for because Dylan had mentioned it. Do you think Dylan will be okay? Chess asked Hunter. Couldn't you talk to your mom? See if she'll let him stay and try again at school? Blood roared in Dylan's ears. He thought of the frosted windshield of Chess's car, the heater thawing his cold hands. He had kissed her. She hadn't stopped him. She'd made a joke after he'd made that Blade Runner reference, as though kissing were a normal part of any conversation. She seemed to like it. To like him, not him pretending to be Hunter. Hunter turned away from Chess with a glower. Doubt I could change my mom's mind, he grunted. He shoved boxes out of the way and sent others zooming toward the back room with superhuman strength. Dylan realized the boxes were empty. Where did these bagels come from? Hunter asked, glaring at the bag on the counter. Dylan had made Hunter forget all about them. Dylan's Vorpal was strong today. He really could make Hunter walk to the bus station. He could make Chess forget about him, at least for a little while. Dylan might never get back to the other place, but he could still use his Vorpal. He could use it to get what he wanted here in the real world. The wind-chime voice of the Girl Queen came back to him, speaking words he didn't understand. He would never see her again. Chess was all he had of happiness. Dylan maneuvered through the shelves toward the front of the store. He stopped as Chess spoke again to Hunter. Here, I've borrowed this way longer than I meant to, she said. From behind a stack of DVD players, Dylan saw Chess tug up her jacket sleeve and pull the gold bracelet off her wrist. Hunter took it from her, turned it over in his hands. What's wrong? Chess asked. Is it scratched? No, it's just... Hunter shook his head, cleared the foggy look from his eyes. It reminds me of this place Dylan and I used to visit when we were kids. Some invisible hand wrenched the wiring in Dylan's chest. Chess looked confused. Not the lake? Somewhere else. Hunter seemed a million miles away. It doesn't matter. We haven't been there in a long time. Dylan's muscles all went rigid. I keep thinking I'll get back there someday, but... It's real, Dylan thought. I was right. Hunter slid the bracelet onto his wrist. He did it so easily, it was clear he'd done it a million times before. You found that bracelet ages ago and hid it from me, Dylan realized. You thought it could get you back to the other place. But it would never work. Hunter's Vorpal wasn't strong enough. It wasn't anywhere near as strong as Dylan's. Dylan could feel Hunter's Vorpal even now, and it was weak as water. He'll never get back there. How often had Hunter gone there when they were kids? 2, 3 times? Dylan's stomach was a steel clamp. He couldn't count the times he himself had gone. And every time he'd come back with a million stories for Dad. Dad would eat it up, would tell him he had a special gift. Hunter could never compete with that, didn't even try. It seemed so obvious now. All these years, Hunter had been trying to make up for what he had missed out on, with basketball, with girls, with chess. Dylan bumped against the tower of DVD players. Chess whirled at the sound, spotted him. Dylan wielded his vorpal, strong as a sword. "You don't know me." "Oh, I didn't hear anyone come in," Chess said. "What are you looking for?" Her gaze was bland, disinterested. She didn't know him. Dylan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Hunter had taken off the bracelet and was shoving it into the display. Dylan pointed to it. "How much is that?" Hunter's gaze slid over Dylan. "I could negotiate. Someone else wanted me to hold it, but—" The smallest line of confusion appeared between his brows. "Dylan's gone." Dylan thought at Chess. "He's not coming back. You've got Hunter, and he's got you, and Dylan's long gone." He thought it with his vorpal. Snick, snick, snick. "He left, didn't he?" Chess said. "Went out on the bus. I don't think he's coming back." "You can buy it if you want," Hunter said. "He's not coming back for it." Dylan reached for the money in his pocket. He should use it for a bus ticket. He should forget about the bracelet, forget the other place. He would go live with Dad, start over. No more fairy tales, no more screwing up. Hunter was frowning at him. Figuring out who he was? No, just waiting for an answer. I should tell him about the basketball game, Dylan thought. Tell him Dad was there. But how could he? Hunter thinks I'm a stranger right now. He opened his mouth, trying to figure out what to say, but all that came out was, "Yeah, I'll buy it." He put his cash on the counter. "You want to look at it first?" Hunter said, holding out the bracelet. Dylan took it and turned toward the door. He wasn't going to Dad's. He couldn't. The most he could do was take the bracelet away and help Hunter forget about the other place. Help him be happy in the real world like Dylan had never managed to be. "Hey, wait!" Hunter called. Dylan held his breath as he walked out of the shop. The bell on the door tinkled. It went on tinkling, like water over rocks. And on and on. Dylan looked up. A stream cut across his path, trickling over mossy rocks. A canopy of sunlit leaves shuffled overhead. His breath whooshed out. The lattice of branches all but hid a gold-roofed palace. Through a tunnel in the trees, some engineered walkway, Dylan glimpsed a distant city of glass like a gathering of soap bubbles. The cold air pricked his lungs, his eyes. The other place. "Hello?" came a voice. Dylan spun. It was her. A bolt of electricity shot through him. She was taller and full of new angles, but with the same pale water hair and glass-smooth skin. She'd come to meet him. She hadn't forgotten. "You came through yesterday, didn't you?" she said. "And before that, of course, a long time ago. I remember you." The air seemed to bend around her as though she accepted obeisance even from molecules. Her eyes were blue as ice. Dylan wondered briefly if they changed color when she was warm, if there was as much magic to her as he remembered. She crept closer, as though afraid to scare a skittish animal. "Do you know where you are?" It was cold out in the wood. Frigid mud seeped into his sneakers. There wasn't the rain and salt smell of Seattle. The other place. How can it be true? How did I get here? He had about 1,000,000 more impossible questions, too many to ask. Her vorpal was all shifting puzzle pieces. "I'm too old," Dylan blurted. "I shouldn't have been able to come back. I'm too—" He'd forgiven Hunter, in his own way, by taking the bracelet. That was why he'd been able to come. Some rotten core had lifted out of his heart. "Will they let me stay?" His voice was plaintive, like a child's. "Can't I come live with you?" An impossible question, but she didn't seem to mind. "No one can make you leave," she said, and gripped his hand as if to anchor him. Her vorpal was strong, and he felt a ripple of sadness pass from it into his skin when she spoke again. "Do you remember me?" She thought he'd forgotten. "I've been looking for you, trying to get back here," he said. She threw her arms around his shoulders. "And I've looked for you, the same way we once looked for gold in river gravel, for something we never expected to find. But now you finally come again." She'd learned so many new words since he'd last seen her, when he'd taught her his language in bits and pieces. How did she learn to say all of that? She stepped back, and her vorpal was a wave of brightening air. "Others from here have gone to your world, but they never saw you. I would have gone if I could have. They've been to your world many times." "When? I didn't know it worked that way." "Before you ever came here," she explained. "Years before. We discovered a leak, where our two worlds press together. Energy flows from your world into ours. It led us to you." He shook his head, unable to take it all in. "But why would you want to leave a magical kingdom for sidewalks and trash cans?" She laughed and pulled him by the hand through the trees. "Because we are curious about your world, like you were about ours when you were a boy." She led him along the bank of the stream, a map unfurled in his mind. The stream led to a river, to a sunlit cave where he'd seen treasures stored. It fed other streams that ribboned through the forest, through secret glades, where he'd once built forts out of fallen logs. Farther along, where the marshes covered with boardwalk mazes intricate enough to leave any adventurer as dizzy as Dylan felt now. "Do you remember everything?" she asked him. "The den we carved in the bank of the stream, eating berries there until the rain brought our mud ceiling down around us." She laughed again, then stopped and turned to him. "You're the first from your world to come here. You're the first to learn how to use such an ability." "Ability?" "That allows you to find another universe." "Universe?" She frowned. "Is that the right word?" I don't know." He thought of his conversation with Chess the night before, alternate universes and fairy tale lands. The girl queen had brought him to where he could get a better look at the palace through the trees. It wasn't as big as he remembered, just a house, really. Tall, flashing windows, a rooftop gilded with yellow gold leaves. A palace to a young boy desperate for fairy tales, but not actually a palace. Are they real, the things I see? He turned back to her. You're real. A real girl in a real place. It wasn't his own world, it was some alternate universe. Her arms were slim and strong around his shoulders again. I'm as real as you are. Dylan's shoes sunk into the muddy bank of the stream. The silt on his sneakers shone like copper. His vorpal glinted like scales on a fishtail. He could see it, like a halo of light around him.
Two. When we were TV, 10 years from now. Brixney. My training at Flavor Foam went something like this. First, you punch the proper button on the machine, which releases the mold, maybe of Robert Pattinson in his heyday, or Cartoon Princess number 5. That was my manager speaking. One of 2 managers, so I tend to think of him as Mr. 1. I think of the other as the other one. Mr. 1 is skinny as a mendicant, and always has his palms pressed together, as if he's begging me to do these things. Please, please press the button next to the corresponding image. Please don't break the mold, or if you do, please try to land safely on your ass when I give you the boot. The mold goes on the souvenir plastic plate, Mr. 1 begged, extending his palms toward me and the mold in turn. And then the nozzle of the injector goes into the top, and then the edible foam goes into the mold. Does the customer want a flavor gel? Most likely the customer does. Use the gel gun to shoot that in too. He gave a very long pause here, and squinted at me with concern, like he wasn't sure I could handle all of the instructions at once. The gel gun dripped purple goo on the counter. "It'll be your job to clean this up, by the way," he whispered to me. I nodded and wondered if he meant right then, but he plowed on. "The mold gets removed in 2 pieces," he said, breaking it apart and tossing said pieces into the return bin. "And then you've got boisterous Barry action star turned family film dad, or whatever." We stood back to admire the Flavor Foam head's paternal grin. The purple gel glistened in the overhead lights. I secretly think Flavor Foam heads are the weirdest snack ever invented. They're supposedly made of plant proteins and stabilizing agents, whatever that means. I suspect they might actually be made of injectable wall insulation. But they're somehow delicious, especially with fudgesicle flavor gel. Plus, they're low-fat. And the foam looks good on screen. Shiny and colorful, and weird enough to make you look twice. Flavor Foam has cameras jutting from every corner and TV screens mounted on the walls, so customers and employees can enjoy a few minutes of manufactured fame. The thought that Flavor Foam's customers can watch me screw up on screen used to horrify me. But now I'm used to it. "We have all the feed bin molds over here." Mr. One indicated a new machine on the counter. "These are a big hit with kids obsessed with the videos on feed bin that have gone viral. They want to eat Flavor Foam heads of ordinary people who become overnight internet sensations. Like Grumpy Boy swearing he'll never sneeze again. But don't make the mistake of thinking it's only kids who want this. Adults want it too. They want to get man who makes millions selling Comic-Con costumes out of his basement so they can smash in his Flavor Foam head as punishment for his undue success. And for his weird haircut, I wanted to add. I'd actually watched some of that guy's online feed once. He'd installed a camera in his basement so you could see how he carved up styrene sheets for costume armor. But the camera was attached to the ceiling, so mostly you got to see the back of his head as he leaned over his work table. People will watch anything halfway interesting on Feedbin, even a video of someone eating weird food like Flavor Foam. All they want is to get lost in random internet weirdness land. These days I'm pretty much stuck in crippled by debts and sudden death of parents land, hence the new job. "And Brixney," Mr. One pleaded, palms pressed to his heart. "We like to be camera ready at all times here, so the woe is me face, that's not going to work." I gave him a sudden, startled smile that probably made me look like toddler confronted by hungry waterfowl. "Exactly," Mr. One said, bowing his head in reverent approval. "That really rounds out the customer/viewer experience." I spend my breaks poking around on my handheld E-frame, a sadly outdated brick-like model that I rent from the debtor's colony where my older brother and I live because he's so far in debt. For work, I use its recognition software to identify appetizers so that I don't accidentally serve gravy fries to a kid who's ordered cheese fries. Trust me, our gravy and our cheese look identical. But during my breaks, I use it to browse Feedbin for top-rated feeds. I like to watch the feeds from cameras planted in stores and offices and restaurants. Even a lot of security cameras are connected to the internet these days, although I don't really care to watch someone standing in an elevator. Sometimes I find a real gem of a feed coming in through the built-in camera in someone else's E-frame. People will whip out their E-frames to film just about anything happening around them, and they're not shy about sharing it on the internet. A lot of times that's the best way to catch the weirdest or coolest or most embarrassing stuff. Not everyone likes to be on camera, I get that. But if a big corporation decides your feed is popular enough to advertise on, it means you get a cut of their ad revenue. So at least you get paid for your humiliation. Lately I prefer to watch streaming video of people having the worst day ever, so I can add sympathetic emoji in the comments section. except my E-frame doesn't support emoji, so I have to transcribe them. Jacob of Mill Creek gets dumped for a guy wearing a shirt that says, "Llamas love me," teary face. Middle-aged Darren goes on a series of soul-crushing interviews, during which he realizes his computer skills are hopelessly outdated for today's job market. Dismayed face. Overlarge Allison weeps on the pioneer costume of a little-bitty prairie ride operator because her overlarge son can't fit in the safety harness for wagon train chase. Dismay with inverted eyebrows. Sometimes I use my E-frame to call up their locations. The Jacobs and Darrens and Allisons. I think about heading out to Mill Creek Mall or Technology is Supreme Office Park to watch the events unfold before my own eyes, or even stick out my E-frame to add another feed to the bin. But then I think of Griffin. I met Griffin at the My Future Debtors Colony when my older brother, and legal guardian, was sent there with me in tow. Griffin had been in with his dad for 3 years already because of a massive amount of credit card debt that had been bought out by a ruthless collection agency. My brother had a messy mortgage that he'd tried to take on after our parents' death, plus medical bills from our parents' last few comatose weeks of life. In hindsight, we should have sold the house right after our parents' car accident and used the money to pay the hospital. But how can you sell the rickety porch your dad built? Or your parents' bedroom? Or the marks your mom's favorite swivel chair left on the wall? You can't. So you end up giving it to the bank when your mortgage falls into default. Griffin got me the job at Flavor Foam so I could help my brother chip away at his debt and get out of My Future. As a minor, I can't have any debt attached to me and can come and go as I please. But Brandon's stuck there. Can't even go around the corner to get a burger or take a swim in the lake or anything. Not even to, say, get a job with which to pay off his debt. What he can do is try to come up with some clever activity that will make his feed popular and attract advertisers. But nothing that involves nudity or suggesting nudity, or suggesting anything else that typically goes on in a motel, because then the government comes in and confiscates all of My Future's cameras and E-frames, and no one makes money, least of all Visa. The government doesn't mind what your average person does with a camera and an internet connection, but it's pretty intent on preventing debtors' colonies from becoming porn plantations. Residents in My Future are great at pulling together to attract hits on their feeds. Once we did a reinterpretation of Les Miserables, with Javert as an obsessive collection agent, and Jean Valjean doing everything he could to avoid having his adopted daughter grow up in a debtor's colony. Small-time review sites called it poignant and relevant, but Rotten Tomatoes never mentioned it, and it didn't catch on at Feedbin. We also had a good gig going, where we charged local schools to bring in kids so they could see firsthand the dangers of high interest rate credit cards. But a couple of credit companies shut that down real fast, with some bad press about children being exposed to former addicts and dropouts. Brandon did everything he could to play up our own hardships for the camera. Isn't it sad that a couple of orphans are stuck in a mold-infested motel with former gamblers and alcoholics? We got a week's worth of advertising by drawing out an argument about me quitting school to get a job. And people really tuned in to see my relationship with Griffin build. The first time Griffin saw me, I was crying in the stairwell at My Future. It was my first day there, and I'd just found out Brandon and I had to share a room with another person, and discretion dictated that I sleep on a cot in the bathroom. Griffin tried to cheer me up by telling me that at least the place had a pool. "But there's no water in it," I said. "You have to bring your own," Griffin said. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and peered up at him from the dingy carpet of the stairwell landing. I figured this was the best he could do at being funny, so I played along. "No one told me," I said. He considered for a moment, and then said, "I could let you borrow mine." He took my hand and pulled me up while I was still trying to figure out if he was joking. Then he led me outside and down into the empty pool, where an entire sloping wall was covered with 3D chalk art of a whale swimming in sunlit water. It was so beautiful that the only thing I could think of to say was, "This is better than the water I would have brought from home." And Griffin shrugged and said, "It's the only water you can't get wet." He had tons of ideas, all the time. Once he used his chalk to add a footnote to the slogan My Future had painted on a giant sign on the roof. My future, where my future belongs to me, once I obtain a release of lien. He always told me not to take it all so seriously. "Stop staring at the sidewalk," he would say at the plaza. "It's not like you're in debt to these specific people." And I'd try to shake the feeling that tourists were going to walk up to me and demand that I pay them for the toothpaste I'd used that morning. With Griffin, it was easier not to wallow in self-pity. So I spent all my time with him, at work and at my future. In the mornings when the food truck delivered breakfast, the cost of which was added to our debts, we'd peel the foil off our plates and fashion it into ninja stars. In the evenings, we'd browse Feedbin, watching families watch TV together, and spying on old friends from schools we'd never again attend. On clear nights, when the stars were white on black instead of smoggy gray, we'd lie on the roof together and say cheesy things like, "At least they can't charge us for moonlight." Although later they did, by way of imposing a curfew and fining those of us who broke it. Then Griffin started talking about us leaving the colony together. And sorry if that meant not helping alleviate our family's debt, but didn't I want a future? A real future without a lien on it? Our sobby love story got decent ratings. Enough to pull in ad revenue, even. Customers came into Flavor Foam to watch me argue with Griffin in person. Mr. One had our supplier make a mold in the shape of Griffin's head. You can still order Loverboy with big plans to get out of this town, although nobody does. Nobody except me. The day Griffin turned 18, he took his share of the revenue we'd gotten from companies who had advertised on our feeds, and he bought us tickets to the big city. But I wouldn't leave Brandon alone in a debtor's colony with no way to get out. So Griffin left, and I had to do terrible, disproportionate chalk art on my own. And I stopped going on the roof to look at stars. And I stopped watching feeds of happy families in real living rooms. And foil was just foil. My Tuesday afternoon regular is a guy I think of as Saint Professor, a brand new English teacher who comes in after school. His cheap suit and cartoon character tie prove he's straddling the line between determined and defeated. He must be finding it hard to meet his classroom objectives, because he likes to lecture me on how to do my job. "What have you got in the way of historical heroes in government?" he asks. I use my E-frame to scan his tie. An old Bad Dad cartoon episode pops up. Honestly, I wouldn't count on that being a demand we cater to. Bad Dad always reminds me of junior high, watching episodes after school with Brandon, while we ate maple syrup straight from the bottle. We would have inhaled Flavor Foam if it had existed back then. Sometimes I bring it to him from the restaurant, but I can tell he only eats it to humor me. He's obsessed with staying healthy now that he's all I've got. Saint Professor gives his patient sigh and slowly unfolds a menu. "When I ask for a certain type of mold, you hold the menu open like this." He spreads it in front of me and pushes my E-frame out of my eyeline. "See where the categories are listed? See how they're color-coded?" I try to decide which pointy objects I'd most like to hide in his Flavor Foam. "Want to guess which color historical figures get? Or do you already know?" Saint Professor says in his slow, deliberate voice. "The color of your blood when I stick you in the eye with that Bad Dad tie pin?" "It's green," he says. "Historical figures and aging athletes both get green. Now if I scan the menu for green stars, I'll find, look here, that's Oprah. She also gets a light blue star for being a religious figure. That's not political, which is what I was looking for. But you know what? Close enough. Because actually, I believe they made her honorary mayor of a couple towns during that year she was battling colon cancer. So I'll take Oprah bellowing her generosity. How ironic, I say, thinking back to Oprah's online tirade against bad dad's parenting methods. Pardon? Nothing. I whisk the menu out of St. Professor's hand. He glares at me over the top of his glasses. I'll have blueberry muffin flavor gel, young lady. I plod to the mold machine. My other manager, the one I call the other one, is lounging behind the counter, nibbling melted cheese off an order of cheese fries. Fries are fattening, he explains when I give him a look. Which mold you need? Oprah. Eyes shining with empowerment? The other one. I chuckle at my joke. Why do you call me that? You never call Jeffrey Mr. One to his face. He uses a clicky pen to separate the cheese fries from those that have already been de-cheesed. He's the only one who still uses pens to write down orders, instead of tapping pictures on a flavor foam app. Why can't I at least be Mr. Two? You don't really want to be that closely associated with Mr. One. He stops sorting cheese fries to use his pen to whisk hair back over his bald spot. What if I told you the walk-in freezer is on the fritz again, and the ice cream nuggets are in mortal peril? Then can I be Mr. Two? I pause. I could indeed use a good handful of half-melted ice cream nuggets. And Mr. One would never miss them. We're not allowed to serve them to customers, because even frozen solid, they make the flavor foam heads melt, which ruins the customer experience. We're also not allowed to throw them out, because company policy dictates that any food thrown out before the expiration date be donated to a local nonprofit. But it also dictates that we not donate high-caloric food to people of insufficient means, because, as Mr. One says, that's the way to a slow genocide, a genocide of the lower class. Better hurry, chimes in my coworker Lola. I already sold off 2 boxes of those ice cream nuggets at a premium to table 7. You're not really supposed to do that, the other one says, pointing his pen at her. Too late, Lola rolls her eyes. Lola's what you'd call enterprising. She spends her entire shift orchestrating complicated lovers' quarrels with customers for the sake of Flavor Foam's cameras. Then she goes home and spends all her free time orchestrating complicated lovers' quarrels with her friends for whatever cameras might be mounted in shop windows or soda machines or her dining room ceiling fan. You'd think she'd be making enough in ad revenue now to quit working at Flavor Foam, but her ratings are all over the place. I think people sense that all those shrill fights with brooding boys are staged. Right now she's using her E-frame to search the tables of college boys, looking for ones on scholarship who might be willing to do desperate things for a cut of ad revenue. Darn, full ride, she mutters. That hardly helps me. She gives up to watch a feed of a guy trying to convince his girlfriend he's not cheating on her. What girl would actually be attracted to me? He says. I mean, besides you. The feed is coming from one of our own cameras. Lola, they're right there at table 12, I say. Why are you watching them on your E-frame? The big screen over our heads switches to the same feed she's watching. Now all of our customers can watch the guy ask the girls at the next table if they're attracted to him. Like, would you ever ask me to take off my shirt or anything like that? He asks. His girlfriend plunges his E-frame into a Flavor Foam head. Some bot picks up on the fact that the ratings are soaring and plants an American Eagle Outfitters logo in the corner of the screen. Love 'em and leave 'em to keep the ratings high, I mumble as I pour myself a pilfered soda. To keep the ad revenue coming in, right? Add a cake batter flavor gel into that Coke, Lola tells me. Sweeten it up. Your bitterness is poisoning the air for the rest of us. I take a swig of soda and eye the mold dispenser. I'm in a bit of a self-pitying mood. Other one, give me Loverboy with big plans to get out of this town. Not again, Lola says. But I'm already full speed ahead into moody territory. Push the button, other one. Stop calling me that, he says, but he pushes the button. I inject flavor foam into Loverboy with Big Plans. The giant TV screen quickly cuts to my feed. Mr. One always likes to get this on camera. I ignore the screen and consider Loverboy's sad smile. It's been 2 months since Griffin left. He joined the street art movement in L.A. We still talk some. In fact, we talked just last week. He said he misses me. I asked him why he never calls. There was this long pause during which he was either breathing really loudly or the wind was hitting the mic on his E-frame. And then he said, "I always answer when you call me. Like that makes up for it." Then he told me I should come out to Santa Monica. And I told him he should ask his dad too. I admit that was a mean thing to say. We both know his dad can't leave my future until he pays off his debt. But I also think it's mean to abandon your own dad when his only wrongdoing was that he lived off his credit card too long when his unemployment ran out. I can still hear Griffin's voice, low and sad, and mixed in with the sound of the ocean. "Bricks, it's hard here. It's hard without you." It always kills me, that voice. "Then come back," I told him. I lean down close to Flavor Foam's counter. I return Loverboy's sad smile, and for a moment it's almost like we're apologizing to each other for everything that's happened. Then I pour my Coke on top of Loverboy's foam head. It eats through his face and comes bubbling back out of the mold. Fun fact, there's a little bit of baking soda mixed in with the flavor foam. Keeps it foamy. Also turns molds into mini volcanoes. A caption on the screen lets our customers, and any viewers, know that they can order Loverboy with Big Plans to get out of this town, plus a third-tier flavor gel for $12.99. And that Brixney herself will bring it to your table and would probably even pour her soda on it if you asked her real nice. Mr. One must be typing furiously up in the control booth. Then the old replay starts. Even though I've specifically asked Mr. One not to play it ever. It's me and Griffin in our flavor foam uniforms, the old ones without the slimming panels we have now, and you can really tell the difference. We're making our big plans to get out of this town. The old Chevron gas icon shines in the corner of the screen. I just made 10 cents. Thanks a bunch, Mr. One. I decide to take my break early and head out to the patio overlooking the lake. I find a guy sitting on a marble statue of a soda can, very lifelike, and squirting some type of brown liquid. The marble soda can, I mean. The guy isn't lifelike. He's sitting too still. And when I hold up my E-frame, it can't identify him. The screen shows a little clock icon, and then, instead of displaying his name and online profile, just says, "Not for human consumption." My food scanner app is a little hyper, always jumping in before I ask it to. So he has no profile. Very interesting. Means he's either a criminal who's found a way to scrub himself from the internet, except he's too clean for that, an E-free who shuns social media, expect he's also too clean for that, or a rich tourist with some outdated idea of discretion, of which we get plenty around here. His hair is shaggy, skin luminescent. I recognize his clothes from a boutique at the other end of the plaza. Definitely a rich tourist. He gazes out across the plaza, ignoring the notebook in his hand, and curiously watching preteens buzz about the pavilion where a FeedCon expo is going on. In about an hour, all of those kids will be buzzing over to Flavor Foam for a snack break. Probably sans tip money. My calves ache at the thought. The truth is, I'm not making nearly enough money at this job to put a dent in Brandon's debt. And contrary to what collection agencies think, no relative is going to take interest in our sad plight and come up with the cash to spring us from my future. All we have left is an uncle who subscribes to the idea that throwing money at a problem never solves it, which usually I would agree with. Also, with Brandon's interest piling up the way it is, he's on track to be transferred to a colony 30 miles south, where they sleep 8 to a room and get 1 bathroom for an entire floor. So, a good-looking Richie Rich tourist is just what I need right now. He can either add some pretty to my feed and get me some ad revenue, or he can give me cash directly once I become his temporary townie girlfriend. I try again with my E-frame. It still can't get a read on him. It also tells me the plume of brown liquid coming from the marble straw is not for human consumption. Way to advertise a soda, right? I try to think of something to say to him, something Lola might say to lure him into the choppy waters of our shop, and moor him in a booth with a good camera angle. I can get you a Flavor Foam girl with pleasing anatomy 4 hours before the evening shift. Please be advised this is not a public drinking fountain, but a flawed attempt at advertising soda with something resembling soda, but completely unsafe for consumption. I'm covered in my own skin! That last one is a line from a feed that was popular last week. But maybe it's too old to reference. Maybe he's heard it so many times it's not funny anymore. He'll have to force a laugh, and then wonder why he wastes his vacation hanging out on the plaza meeting desperate locals. I get so flustered thinking about it that I finally just say, "The seating is located inside, where the chairs are." It comes off a little snarky. I'm not having the best of days. St. Professor, my Tuesday regular, is not happy that I abandoned him. "I've been watching your feed on my E-frame here," he says. An image of me through one of Flavor Foam's cameras shows on his clunky school-prescribed E-frame. "I saw you loitering on the patio. When I place my order, you fill it right away." I'm guessing he had a particularly bad day at school. "And you don't shove it onto the table like you just did," he continues. "You approach from right here near my elbow and gracefully slide it in front of me, like a seal gliding over butter." As St. Professor leans over the table, I notice a little notebook in his shirt pocket, on which he has scrawled T.S. Eliot. I almost grunt in frustration. If you're going to lecture me on something, how about poetry? How about ultra-dense symbolism that I'd never be able to decode on my own? "I come here every Tuesday," St. Professor says. "I know how these things are supposed to work." "I'm also here every Tuesday," I say. "Also pretty much every other day of the week." St. Professor's frustrated scowl turns into a smile of genuine warmth. "Don't worry, you'll catch on," he says, and gives me an encouraging chuck on the shoulder. I grit my teeth. I make no further delay in searching out those imperiled ice cream nuggets. And goody, there's still some boxes left. I squat in the frosty air of the walk-in fridge and consider ways to prevent Brandon's transfer to Debtor's House, which I've heard serves only 1 large meal a day and encourages residents to scour the surrounding neighborhood for cans to recycle in order to make some snack money. Brandon's skinny enough as it is. He thinks I don't know he sneaks his bacon onto my plate every morning like I'm a little kid. I could call Griffin and ask him to send us some of the cash he's made apprenticing with a guy who does body art. Something I could split with his dad. I toy with my E-frame, considering the idea. Calling Griffin would mean hearing his voice, hoarse with salt air and sadness, and trying to keep my heart from breaking to pieces all over again. "Remember the times on the roof, under the stars? They don't have stars here. You can hardly see the streetlights for all the smog." It would mean trying, failing, not to get angry at him for leaving. How can I ask him for money? I haven't exactly been his biggest supporter lately. Or I guess the better question is, how much does he really owe me? "Brixney? You know what, Brixney?" I turn to find Mr. One red-faced with disapproval, hands pressed together under his chin. "Did you pay for those ice cream nuggets?" He's pleading with God that it be true. "They're melting. They're making a mess of the walk-in." I point at an ice cream puddle leaking onto the refrigerated floor. "And you're taking initiative, and that's great. He hunches his shoulders. He's practically bowing to me. But eating food that belongs to the store and not to you? That's a fast ticket to scraping the seat of your pants on the pavement outside the door. Know what I mean? I mean when I fire you. Okay, well, don't fire me. I go into a hot sweat. My stomach rejects the aesthetics of cold ice cream mixed with fiery panic. I'm just eating ice cream nuggets that we're allowed to neither sell nor toss. Basically, what I'm eating is trash. Except that if you were eating trash, he winces in an exaggerated way, as if pained on my behalf. It'd be because you were on the streets without a job. Without this job, specifically. My face muscles spasm a little. I bend down on pretense of examining the leaking box. I think I can staunch